The origins and ancient history of the Ice Troll Empire, aka the Drakari Empire, are, like the ones of the Gurbashi and Amani empires, kind of complicated and filled with retcons. The most recent official version of events is that long ago, during the Akiran Troll Wars, the Zandalari sent the most ambitious troll tribes across ancient Kalimdor as a vanguard in their counter-offensive against the Akir. The Drakari tribe ventured to the north, where, in the area surrounding the Storm Peaks, they fought against a group of Akir, the ancestors of the modern-day Nerubians, who had enslaved many of the local Tol'vir. These corrupted Tol'vir, known as Obsidian Destroyers, were a great challenge to the Trolls, but they, over time, developed new tactics to defeat them by devising ways to topple them over. With the remaining northern Akir burrowing underground, the Ice Trolls spread across northern Kalimdor, creating, well, either an empire of their own or an autonomous part of the larger Troll Empire, the latest sources implying more so the latter option. A few thousand years later, while they weren't as affected as, for instance, the Zandalari or the Amani, the Drakari Empire and or autonomous region still suffered territorial losses to the emergent Night Elf Empire. As an example, the Night Elf city of Shandaral, whose ruins are in modern-day Crystal Song Forest, was considered secure enough by the Highborn to store magical artifacts there and was situated practically a stone's throw away from the Ice Troll temple city of Zul'Drak. The Drakari Empire also took a hit during the Sundering when the remote Frostmane and Winteraxe tribes, located in modern Dunmerol and Alterac respectively, were cut off from the Empire's center. Still, other than the Zandalari Empire, the Drakari Empire was the longest lived and most prosperous Troll Empire, outliving the greatest portion of the Amani Empire by 2800 years and the Gurubashi Empire by 1500, and only falling recently to the Scourge. The Ice Trolls, and the Drakari specifically, are known as the most bloodthirsty, savage and violent of the Trolls, but that's more so by word of God reputation rather than actual fact. While they were, like most other Trolls, fairly xenophobic, there's no known record of them waging war against the other inhabitants of Northrend, and it seems that they were fairly content to stick to Zul'Drak and its immediate surroundings. Just as an example, the Shandaral Highborn that I mentioned previously were greatly weakened by the loss of the Well of Eternity, but their main concern was their vulnerability to diseases, not the neighboring Drakari Trolls, and the neighboring societies coexisted for about 4,000 years. In addition, the Drakari were content to let the Rageclaw Wolvar live in peace in the south of Zul'Drak, not just in peace, but according to the Wolvar in, quote, friendship. And this alliance was only destroyed when the Wolvar confused the undead Scourge Trolls that attacked them with actual living Drakari. Unlike the Drakari though, the Frostmane Trolls can quite convincingly be called savage, as their millennia-long constant guerrilla war against the dwarves pushed them to increasingly drastic measures to survive. Unlike the Gurubashi and Amani empires, the Drakari maintained a fairly centralized society, probably owing to the fact that their empire remained stable until very recent times. When compared to the other two empires, which, probably due to their collapse, are more of a coalition of different tribes under one main one, the Drakari were, by contrast, until their collapse, only one tribe and actually ruled by a king, not by a chieftain who had to assert his dominance over the other chieftains. The one exception to this is the Winteraxe Ice Trolls, who recently fled the Eastern Kingdoms to rejoin the Drakari, and the Drakari promptly sent them to the front lines against the Scourge as a, quote, power move. Ironically enough, the Winteraxe actually survived the fall of Zul'Drak, while the Drakari, especially after the campaigns in Pandaria, did not. If you also look at Zul'Drak in general, it seems to be hierarchically divided into multiple levels, though with some overlap. To that end, the lowest level seems to be the most underdeveloped, and primarily devoted to garrisoning Drak'Tharon Keep. The Drakari occupied areas immediately outside Zul'Drak are also either ancient ruins or seem to be devoted to Zul'Drak's defense. The second level is the one which holds Zul'Drak's visible and actually fairly complex agriculture and the location where their aqueduct comes to an end. The third level is mainly devoted to temples. And finally, the fourth level holds Gondrak, the Drakari seat of power and also their main religious center, home to their greatest prophets, and the level itself was also home to some of their military leadership. Still, the Drakari now have been destroyed following the Scourge invasion and the failed Zandalari campaigns of Pandaria. It is likely though that many individual Drakari survived, as at the very least many trolls could be seen fleeing Zul'Drak into the Grizzly Hills even before the outcome of the war was decided. The Drakari are well known for the fact that they, at times reluctantly, sacrifice their Loa in order to gain power in their desperate struggle against the Scourge. However, while it is the most notable, they also try to take many other desperate, though far less effective measures to protect themselves. For one, they captured and tried to weaponize Gorloks, but after their experiments failed, they sealed the remainder inside Gondrak. Since the Drakari don't have mages, they also try to enslave local water elementals by using their shamans, though the attempt failed after we adventurers got involved. There are also hints that their attempts to combat the Scourge predate, by at least a little bit, the undead invasion of Zul'Drak proper. Namely, the Drakari captured and tamed the Devil Sar King Dread, and kept him in Drak'Tharon Keep after one of their hunting parties discovered that he was somehow living in an area tainted by the Scourge Blight and was not affected by it. It's also notable that Zul'Drak is one of the very few areas the Scourge was invading in Northrend that was not infested with undead Nerubian burrows, presumably due to their ancient enmity between the trolls and their Akir ancestors. Still, the power the Drakari gained by sacrificing their Loa, even though they weren't able to claim all of them, or even all of the power from some of the ones they did sacrifice, was still apparently strong enough that their planned counterattack, until we players intervened, threatened to, quote, plunge the region into chaos. Some of the Drakari survivors of the Scourge invasion have also turned to using Necromancy. The process was present in a very limited fashion in Zul'Drak itself, where it probably began as one of their desperate measures against the Scourge. Namely, the prophet of the Loa Runok accidentally absorbed too much power from his Loa and killed himself as a result, but his adherents promptly revived him so that he could finish the job. Later on, some of the Drakari forces under the Zandalari and Pandaria could also be seen using Necromancy to augment their limited forces. Following the fall of Zul'Drak, one of the isolated groups of survivors, who took the name the Ice Tusk tribe, also turned to using this form of magic, reviving their own dead, in order to survive in their harsh environment.